Conscious Community Podcast is brought to you by Conscious Community Magazine, America's oldest metaphysical magazine, continuously in print since 1979. We feature articles about nutrition, holistic living, yoga, healing, and much more in each monthly issue, as well as regular columns and a comprehensive events calendar and community happening section.
Welcome to the Conscious Community Podcast. Today we're speaking with Edith Hall, author of Aristotles Way, How Ancient Wisdom Can Change Your Life. Edith, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hello, Edith.
Hi.
Well, the first thing we'd like to ask you is, how did you discover the work of Aristotle? Was that at university or?
It was at university, yeah. I was at Oxford and I was studying classics. I was doing Latin and Greek literature and history. And I had to write an essay about making decisions in Greek tragedy. And my wonderful tutor told me to go off and read the third book of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And it blew me away. I, for the first time in my life, heard a voice that seemed to be describing exactly how I felt about moral dilemmas and exactly how I felt about my position in the world relative to other people, animals, and ethics and everything. So I got very excited and started to read all the rest of this great mind and became more and more impressed and amazed by how he developed a whole system of just thinking. I mean, he's actually the father of logic. This isn't just about your personal life, and it's not just about your own subjective self. Everything interconnects. It's a general outlook on the world, which was identical to mine, except he got a lot further down the road. And I actually started, he's very encouraging. The whole thing is written in terms of if you apply this to your life, you will get happier. And so I decided to do that. And it's a secular ethics. That means it's a system of making decisions about how to behave without God. You know, there is no God in it. That doesn't mean he was an atheist, but he just didn't think that was a God who was minutely involved. You weren't going to hit by a thunderbolt if you did something wrong. He didn't think you were going to suffer after death if you did anything wrong. He thought it was entirely up to humans to create their own happiness. This spoke very powerfully to me at that age because I'd been very lost since I was about 13.
It was interesting reading about you that your father was an Anglican priest and that you were interested in astrology and Buddhism and transcendental meditation. So how does Aristotle fit into all those different systems?
For me, he was the non-mystical answer, really. I was brought up a very devout Christian. I really believed it. I can remember going to church and praying with all my little 8-year-old heart, and I really believed that if I was a good girl and obeyed all the rules, which became increasingly irksome as I got to my teens, because the rules of that form of Christianity are extremely sexist, apart from anything else. I'm 13. I just simply lost every iota of faith in any of it. I just didn't believe a word of it. I just couldn't. I wanted to. Mm-hmm. It left a huge hole in my life. So at an age of like 14, 15, 16, when I think other girls were worrying about whether to wear blue mascara or what fashion to wear, I was worrying about whether there was any point in being good, trying to live a virtuous life and be good to other people, if there was no punishment if you didn't. And I got increasingly disturbed by the idea that there's actually no point in being good. You might as well go out and get everything for yourself. There's nothing to be gained if you're not going to be punished. Why not just get the most money you can, the most things you can, treat other people badly if it's involving any kind of sacrifice to be nice to them and so on. So by about 16, I was trying practically anything I could. I mean, I tried fairly mild forms of drugs. I tried spiritualism. I did try astrology. I tried Buddhism. I tried again to tell myself I was born again, which I wasn't. And I had far too many boyfriends. I really kind of went off the rails in a very classic teenage way. But that was because I didn't see any point in trying to do anything else. And that was because I had this gaping hole where the faith had been. So when I found a secular practical ethics that had none for me of the problems associated with Christianity, and was very pro pleasure and pro your physical self. It was all about, Aristotle's very much believes that we our bodies are really important, and that sex is important, and food is important, and pleasure is important, and it's good to drink some good wine. And this is very, very different from more ascetic ancient religions. He's very, very modern, and he doesn't think you'll ever be happy if you act out of accordance with your emotions. You've got to try and find a way where reason and emotion go together at all times. Where Plato, his teacher, had said that we're split. We've got a reasonable, logical, philosophical head, and we've got this disgusting animal body that has all these desires that we've got to sit on and control. Aristotle said not at all. It's all part of the same system. It's very holistic. And his image for emotion versus reason was a spoon. It's just the convex and concave sides of a spoon. It's two different ways of looking at the same thing. And this seemed to me to be utterly liberating, that it was okay to have strong emotions, that it was okay to like fun and pleasure and happiness and joy, and that it was okay to be a woman who liked men and wanted to have children and enjoy being an animal. Yeah, all those physical sides of life. It was intensely liberating for me.
So that's more of a non-dualist worldview versus a very dualist worldview, which I feel is very much the shortcoming of a lot of Western interpretations of even Christianity. I don't think Jesus was actually telling people to live that way at all. He was kind of an angry, fiery person himself. He was okay with his emotions.
Christianity has very often been anti-pleasure and anti-body. So it really has. And your physical body, and it inherits this from Platonism. Your physical body is just a sort of rather horrible embarrassment until you die and you'll finally go and join the great spiritual world of ideas beyond the planet. Well, I don't see that at all. Some of my greatest happiness in life has very much been as what Aristotle called humans, just the highest animal. We are responsible for other animals, and that we can talk about later, feeds into his green politics. But we're simply animals, but with a bigger brain.
I think that your experience as a teenager is probably pretty familiar, and this is a subject we've talked about many times, is that when you're brought up in a very strict Christian or other religious household, and you get to a certain age and you start questioning things and you start, deconstructing some of the rule-based systems that they determine virtue by, and you find contradictions, that oftentimes the reaction is to just go the complete opposite direction. Right. And it's like, oh, well, clearly this is nonsense, so I'm just going to reject everything, smoke crack, and worship Satan. And like, and it's you just like, I was lucky in that I actually kind of got like a little bit of everything when I was growing up. So I never really went to that extreme hedonistic extreme. But I think that some of the behavior you see out there in the world today is a consequence of teaching people, oh, you've got to follow all these rules and then you'll be rewarded after you die. Because if they ever lose that belief, or question that belief, well, then they're going to just do me, get whatever you can, and, amass as many billions of dollars as you want, and, to hell with everybody else. And I don't have a very like rule-based idea. Like, to me, it's kind of like that when you have rules like, don't eat this, don't eat that, cut your beard this way, cut your beard that way. Like, there's kind of always exceptions to those rules. Absolutely. And that a lot of evil is created by like slavishly obeying the rules at all times. There's a time and a place where that rule doesn't apply, and then there's a time and a place when something that would ordinarily be acceptable isn't acceptable. Yep. And it really it depends on the situation. And tying into something else we wanted to talk to you about, like, as you grow up and you mature, you gain the critical faculties necessary to be able to make a judgment call without just going back to some list of rules where you have to look at the circumstances and make a decision. I almost see it as kind of like a childlike outlook on the world that, you know, you want somebody else to make all the decisions for
That's
you
right.
and give you a set of rules that you can follow so you don't have to think. And that's ultimately, I think, just kind of lazy and immature.
Well, you sound like somebody who's happenstanced yourself onto Aristotelian ethics completely.
Oh, I mean, I did
that.
have, you know, I took some philosophy classes and
Okay.
logic and whatnot. One of my favorite professors was actually
That's a
my
word.
humanities professor who taught me a lot of this stuff.
Word for what you call the critical faculty, right, is phronesis. It's practical wisdom, and he says it's just like any other skill, but you've got to exercise it to get better. If you want to learn the violin so that you can play the brilliant concertos without even thinking, right, they just become habitual, then you've got to have practiced and practiced, right? So it's also very positive because it means you get wiser from this point of view. The older you get, the more decisions you've got under your belt, you know, the more life choices you've made and seen either the negative or the positive effects, the better you get at it. And one of the beauties for me of Aristotelian ethics is that you can start at any age. I mean, you could read my book. I've had people of like 80 have come to some of my talks saying this is so great because it's never too late, right? And people who've had a lot of experience of life have also got a lot of material evidence to chew over, like where did I go wrong? Where did I go right? I could never, I've been trying to be an Aristotelian since I was about 20, but I could never have written this book. I'm 59 now. I could never have written this book earlier. I mean, I've been through divorce. I've had children. I've raised two of my own and one of my husband's. I've been bereaved badly. I've had professional rivalries to face. I mean, heaven knows I've, you know, been lucky enough not to live through a world war or something that's affected me directly, but I have had pretty much every sort of basic personal experience, both in the working and professional world and in my private life. And that's why I talk so much about my friendships and so on in the book, because it is experience based.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good point to make. You were saying at your age now, you couldn't have done that before. And our society in general is so focused on being young. For example, music artists nowadays, they're like, oh, you have to have a career by the time you're 25 or 30 for the most part. But if you think about, I have a music background, most of the great composers, their great pieces, they wrote in their mature period, or the great painters in their mature period, and they were 45, 50 years old when they reached that. And I feel like we're really losing a lot of great potential work because people shut themselves down. They think that, oh, I've missed my chance. It's too late. But what you're saying, it's like you can wake up to it at any point. And
I might as well go sell insurance because I didn't have my masterpiece done by the time I was 25.
I hate that. And you see celebrities and sports stars and pop stars who've made it young and then never do anything else. And they almost all end up really dissolute and absolutely wretched.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, yeah.
You take your time about achieving your goals. And here Aristotle himself is this fantastic role model because he didn't get to do what he always wanted to do, which was found his own university, the Lyceum, and run it the way he wanted. Aristotle himself was at the beck and call of other people. He worked under Plato till he was 37 at the academy. And then fairly soon after that, Philip of Macedon hired him to teach Alexander the Great. And he needed a job. He wasn't a wealthy man by birth. His father was a doctor, a physician. And it wasn't until Philip of Macedon got assassinated. He was a terrible, terrible Macedonian tyrant. And Alexander the Great went east, famously, to India, that Aristotle immediately, Alexander went east, went back to Athens and took the money he'd made working for the monarchy and opened the Lyceum at 49. And he actually says that he thinks that the peak of any human's life is around 49. And I think that's because you haven't lost any of your physical faculties. I mean, you're not strong like a 30-year-old, but you haven't lost anything yet. But your brain is really at peak, you know, and you've got a lot of experience under your belt. So I find people very responsive to this, that it's thinking about your life as a whole arc. It's not about, you know, making it by the time you're 21. And it can be started at any time because it's also completely forgiving. Just because you may have made huge errors in the past, right? That's because you haven't yet figured out how to deliberate and how to make decisions. You don't have to beat yourself up over that in Aristotelian ethics. That wasn't necessarily your fault if you hadn't got there. So it's very forgiving. So even if you've spent your life in prison, you can decide to become an Aristotelian. It really isn't about self-punishment. He says that one of the greatest barriers to happiness is self-hatred.
Oh, that's definitely true.
If you not like yourself, then you cannot like other people, because you can't be forgiving. You've got to be able to forgive yourself in order to be nice to other people. He's very explicit about that. It's about liking yourself and moving on.
One thing that in one of your articles I saw was that you mentioned that he believed that you didn't really develop the ability to reason properly until you were about 25. And that a lot of the research now is showing that, like, your frontal lobe, your ability to foresee the consequences of your action doesn't really develop until you're in your mid-20s.
Isn't that weird?
Yet we expect people at 18 to decide what they're going to do for a career for the rest of their life.
Not only that, but certainly in Britain, the care system for kids who end up in orphanages, they're chucked out on the streets on their 18th birthday. On their 8th, and almost all the girls they end up in prostitution.
Yeah,
boys end up in crime because they have no adults anymore. So there is actually a movement in this country to get care, at least semi-care, halfway houses, continue to 25 for exactly this reason. But what's amazing is Aristotle knew nothing about neurology or the way the brain is structured. Of course he didn't, but he had somehow anticipated that, and he thinks that. It's very, very difficult, especially, he actually says, because of violent emotional attractions to people with the hormones. He actually says that people at that age mistake true love, which is, mutual regard and mutual goals, for just really liking being with the person. And he talks about that at great length, that you can't even choose friends properly when you're 19.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Oh,
yeah.
I feel that.
And especially for women, even more than men,
absolutely
the emphasis to get married young. I don't know if it's still an issue in Britain, but it seems to be in this country. Still like a idea that
if you haven't gotten married by the time you're 25, you're an old maid and nobody will ever love you. And it's like, how are you, if you don't even know who you are or what you want out of life, how are you supposed to choose who you're going to be with for the rest of your life?
And also, he would be appalled as I am as I've gotten older at the way that people have children with other people without even discussing whether they both want a child. The idea that you would do the thing that demands more responsibility than anything else in the world, which is to look after a new human, with someone you've never even discussed it. People get pitched the whole time or pregnant the whole time without actually having that conversation. It's absolutely baffling to me why you would do that. And I have girlfriends with PhDs who just get pregnant and then expect the man to suddenly turn into a brilliant father when they never even asked if he wanted to be a father, right? So this is the chapter in my book on relationships takes Aristotle's ideas about friendship, which are some of his most useful and most sophisticated. And they have really helped me. And anybody, anytime in their life, can decide to have a formal review of all their relationships and actually see whether they're reciprocal or not. And the good thing is if somebody isn't really being a good friend to you, you don't have to lose them altogether, because he's got these 3 categories of friendship, right? Which is the close friends. And he thinks that people that includes, say, your spouse equivalent or your children, but there may well be members of your blood kin group who aren't actually very nice to you, right? So you pick the ones who are, and that is what.
I forget what the Oscar Wilde quote is, but he's got a number on family.
But so there's your best friends, and there's a thing called pleasure friendships, right? Which is a fantastic concept. That is somebody that the belief, the understanding is that there's something you like doing together, whether it's going to the greyhound races, going to the opera, having a drink, cracking really dark jokes, something you like to do with that person. But that doesn't mean that you can ask them to drive you to rehab, right? That person is a pleasure friendship. And that's what young people do, is mistake pleasure, just the pleasure of being with someone, for the proper reciprocal respect type. But you can actually just move. So I've moved quite a few of my birth family into pleasure, which means I'll meet 2 or 3 times a year for a meal. I never expect them to do anything else for me, because I know they won't, and therefore I don't feel I have to do it for them, if you see what I mean. But it allows you not to just sever all ties if someone lets you down, right? Because you just say to yourself, that's a pleasure friendship. And then as a utility friend, and utility friendship is such a helpful concept. It sounds really cynical, but that would be all your peer group. If when I had my children, the other mums at the toddler group, we knew we weren't going to be best friends for life. But for that particular time, it was unbelievably helpful to have other women with small children in my neighbourhood, right? But because if you both accept that anyway, anybody can do a review of their friendships this way, and you can keep them all or get rid of them. They're really destructive for you. But you've just got to be clear what you're having them for. Is it usefulness, like your neighbour who feeds your pets and you feed theirs? Is it pleasure? Neither of those categories do you go round to and weep on when you're drunk, right? You don't do that, okay? You only do that with your very close ones. And this really, I found, of the chapters in my book, the one that the teenagers really go for, that I've really found. And my 20-year-old daughter has actually read the whole book. I think she was looking for gossip about her mother's younger life. But she has said that she finds that chapter extraordinarily helpful. She's navigating her first year at university, right? So she actually appraises people as to which category they're likely, which means I think she should be much more selective about who she invites to be a best friend or a boyfriend.
That's something I've often said. If I could go back in time and talk to myself when I was 18, I would be very cautious about who I would consider a close friend.
Exactly.
That I made, for example, my father passed away when I was about 20 years old.
Oh, I'm sorry, that early.
And he was very, he was sick for a year or two, and he was very insistent that I come stay with him, because I think my family did a fairly good job of not letting me know how sick he was. But I think he knew that he wasn't going to be around. He wanted to see me. And at that time, I had a girlfriend, I had friends, and I had a job. And I was like, look, I'm in here in Illinois. He was in California. Like, I can't just drop my entire life here. And looking back, it's like, I don't have that job anymore. I'm not friends with those people anymore. I don't have that girlfriend anymore. Like, I could have spent, even if it had been very sick, I could have spent, 6 months or a year with him that I, pretty much can't get back. But I just decided, because I didn't understand the difference at that point. I mistook all these things like, oh, well, it feels so important to me right now. And really, like, none of those people were lasting parts of my life.
I made the mistake of marrying the one I met at 19. Time I was 30, it was completely clear that he actually just would have made a terrible father. And I knew that one of my great life goals was to be a mum. I was absolutely determined to be a mum. And so I then went and looked very deliberately, having read all of that Aristotle, for a man who would make a good dad. That was the criterion, right? Because that's what I wanted in a man.
I like that you have a much more rational, secular approach to something that, I'm divorced, Janae's divorced, and for our own reasons, we both decided like that wasn't the right person for us, and both of us started really young, and I got married the first time when I was like 25, and at the time I thought I was getting a late start on it all. I had plenty of friends who got married before they were 21, and I thought I was such a grown-up. And now I look back and I'm like, I see a 25-year-old today.
Well, they're getting engaged, and they're like, why are you doing that? Don't do it. Wait till. Yeah.
But that I've often described it as like, for whatever intangible reason, I feel like our society, I don't know how it is in Britain, but especially with the rise of online dating, everything's almost like a database where you have all these characteristics and they have all these characteristics, supposed to check all these boxes of similarity. And then if you have X percentage of compatibility, well, then you'll make a perfect match. I've been saying since I had become single again, I'm looking for the right person. I don't necessarily think there's only one right person, but it has to be the right person. And whether or not you both like, detective novels, I don't think really is as important as
having similar life goals, like she was saying.
Yeah, and that's something that's something that I found is that when I was single again and I started dating, that there would be people that on that surface, database level, we had everything in common, and I couldn't stand them.
No, that database should be: do you want to get married? How many children do you want? Do you want to live in the country or the city? How important is your job so important to you that you would expect your partner to, those sorts of things. Is what do you want to be able to say on your deathbed you've done?
I think it sounds like what you were saying about the different types of friends is our dating system set up to find someone who's a pleasure friend, someone who likes to go and have the same cocktails with you and watch the same shows or whatever.
But my husband, the father of my children, with whom I've been now for 28 years, we have a major incompatibility, which is that he hates travel. Absolutely hates it. I love travel. He will not get on a plane. He will not leave, basically, Britain. He'll only travel if he's driving with his dog in the back, But if I travel an awful lot, that could have broken. The point was we both wanted to have a monogamous relationship and raise kids together. It's far more important. So we decided very early on I was allowed to travel, provided I didn't sleep with anyone else. Right? That's the only rule. I can have as many friends as I want. Just don't sleep with them. And people say to me, how can you possibly stay with him? He even voted Brexit and I voted Remain. And I know marriages that are split up on that. Couldn't care less. I couldn't care less. He's the father of my children. Right?
Yeah, that's... you mentioned monogamy. That's something that's kind of tying back to what you were saying about turning 13 and rejecting the religion that you'd been raised in, is that there's a number of things that are, to me, kind of connected with religion. Like, for example, getting married, having kids, being monogamous. And I feel like a lot of people feel the need to reject those too. And it's like, I'm not religious. I'm definitely not a fundamentalist. And I don't want to have 50 girlfriends. I just want to have, one partner. Again, I don't know what it's like in Britain now, but things are so extreme now where it's like you either are highly religious and you have a repressed housewife, or you're utterly hedonistic and you don't have any long-term relationships and everything is just about sex and pleasure. And there's no middle ground where it's like, well, I'm not super religious, but I'm happy with just being with the one person, and I want somebody who's just happy to be with me.
I actually find that if I've ever been tempted, and everybody's tempted sooner or later in the course of 28 years, Aristotle's, amazingly, actually, for an ancient Greek man, hated adultery. He wasn't a prude at all. Before you were married, you did what you want. You need to get sexual experience, whatever. But he hated monogamy because he saw the household, especially if you're raising young, but it doesn't have to be, but the household is the absolute building foundation block of society. Society is just a set of interconnected households right up to the state, right? And citizenship, the way you treat other citizens, is just a dilute form of the love that you have for your closest friends. It's a form of utility friendship, but with certain. And he says, if you break the brick that's the foundation block of trust, the whole of society will be debased. Do you understand what I mean? So you're not just cheating on one guy or one woman. You are certainly risking your children's psychological health, without a doubt. But it actually has ramifications for everybody. If there's no trust in the basic relationship, which is the spousal one, however broadly defined, then that has stopped me ever playing around in a way that traditional ideas of cheating on one individual haven't, because I just see it as I would feel so bad about myself for letting everybody down.
Yeah.
Does that make sense at all?
Well, that's why
It's part of a bigger responsibility for the happiness of everyone.
That's why it's such a kind of a setup for failure, that we're kind of expecting 18, 19, 20-year-olds to pick a partner and settle down for the rest of their life. Absolutely. Because you don't even know who you are, let alone who they are. And, it's hard enough. There's going to be temptation anyway. But, if you're miserable with a person and there's temptation, then you are going to end up cheating. And then you are going to let everybody down and break up your marriage.
I know. And I watch these talk shows with broken up families. The people come on stage to air their grievances, and I cannot believe my eyes about people who've got children with 5 different people and people whose parents have stuck them in care at the drop of a hat and things like that. It's almost always because it was too young.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost always that somehow or other this baby has appeared at when you were 18 or something like that.
I think ultimately most people, if they waited till they were in their late 20s or early 30s to think strongly about marriage, probably would end up having kids or wanting to have kids. Yeah. But I think most people before 25, they're doing it because they think they're supposed to, and they haven't really had the chance to decide to on their own. Right. And I think people kind of get emotionally stunted that if you marry your high school sweetheart and you start having kids at 18, 19 years old, like you never have a chance to grow up. I see 20 people in their 40s and 50s who kind of act like they're in middle school.
I know.
And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they never went through that process of finding themselves in their 20s.
That kind of ties in the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is you talk about the importance of planning and how planning can lead us to happiness, which I think a lot of people would go, no, it's the opposite. To be happy, you're free and you have no plans and you do whatever you want. But
spontaneity.
Yeah, but you'll never get to where you really want to be if you don't plan. Like you were saying, even about someone wants to play the violin, they have to practice to get better. They think, well, this other person knows the secret and they'll teach me how to play the violin because, in an afternoon, but that's not really teaching you anything.
Yeah, we have a very instant gratification society, even when it comes to self-improvement. Like, and I think that might relate to so many people being raised in those kind of rule-based fundamentalist religions that even when they reject that, they just go looking for a different set of rules that if they just say, I see it with atheists, where they reject religion, they decide they're atheist, and they don't necessarily learn much about atheism. They just say that's what they are, and now they have the right set of rules to follow. And they're still postponing what they really need to do, which is learn how to think for themselves.
Yeah. It's all about how you define happiness. The Aristotelian happiness is not a passing mood that can be brought on by a happy meal or a cocktail in happy hour. These sort of ideas. Marketing people use this word that you get happy with a quick fix of some transient pleasure. I mean, far, far, far from it. It can only come actually from within yourself, because if you don't feel good about it, comes from that feeling of being able to look in the mirror at night and know that you haven't done anything horrible to anybody, and that you have tried to do your best. Because if you've tried to do your best to be the best possible you and worked on your not so nice characteristics and recognize what you are really good at or your strong personal qualities and sort of enhance those further, then you get a sort of really Teflon sense of contentment. Actually, really quite Teflon, even if you have unbelievably bad luck. And Aristotle's the first philosopher to really say there are forms of really bad luck, like Priam, king of Troy, who lost all his 50 children and his city. But he would say that even Priam, if he had struggled on, would have the gratification of knowing he had done his best, right? And nobody could ever take that away from you, right? And Aristotle says he sees how people who are bad are actually almost always really unhappy. Mm-hmm. In different ways, but they are. And he'd seen some incredibly bad behaviour in the Macedonian court. I mean, we're talking poisonings and torture and the most dreadfully bad behaviour of very rich people, extremely rich
It's really interesting how it comes down to like the very basic idea that misery loves company, and the people who want to make you miserable are miserable themselves, and it's just.
But the other thing that really works for me is that he thinks that everybody is good at something, and that is true. It is absolutely true. It may be parenting, it may be gardening, it may be making other people just feel happy, maybe cracking jokes. It could be violin playing, it can be ancient Greek literature. It can be like you discussing quite deep issues in ways that make them accessible to the public. But when you're doing what you're very, very good at, you are not only really happy, and he says you can never ever be really good at something that doesn't make you happy, but the actual exercise of that, we're actually, in Aristotelian definition of happiness, happy now, at least I am, because I'm doing what I'm really good at with other like-minded people who are appreciating what I'm doing, and we're doing it at a high level. So that isn't like having an orgasm or a glass of champagne, right? It's a form of very, very developed being the best possible version of you and exercising it. And that's what you want to try and do with your whole life, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely.
So it's a verb, not a noun. Yeah, it's a way of doing everything with an approach. So it's just, in a way, wrong to translate it to happiness. The ancient Romans, when they read Aristotle, they translated it felicitas, which is felicity, which is a very old-fashioned English word. But true felicity is not the same as instant happiness. It's much calmer and more, you're in a state of felicity for a long time, not a short time.
Yeah.
And it's very deathbed focused. He always quoting the old Greek proverbs about call no man happy until he's dead. Because, it is about whether you want to feel terrible about yourself on your deathbed and all the lives you wrecked and all the things you didn't try to do, aspirations, right? We can't all achieve our aspirations, but nobody ever, we can't all be, all actors are not going to win an Oscar, right? But the ones who tried to are going to be a lot happier on their deathbed than the ones who gave up trying.
I heard they were talking on public radio at one point about IQ and success, and they said that most successful people, when you look at scientists or writers or philosophers or any field, most successful people have a high IQ, but just because you have a high IQ doesn't mean you'll be successful. And the main difference between somebody who's successful and someone who's not is what they, for lack of a better term, called grit, which is just the willingness to, at least in American lingo, like determination, the willingness to fail over and over and over again and still keep trying. Whereas if you're highly intelligent but you have a setback, so you just lay down and die, you're not going to be successful because you are going to have setbacks.
The crucial thing here, and this is why I think Aristotle is so helpful if you're a parent, or in a job which has parental aspects, as I do. I'm a university teacher, so I'm constantly with very young adults, and many other jobs have this parental aspect in them, is helping the young find out what it is they're really good at. There is no greater gift than somebody taking that very, very seriously, talking about it with you, not in a pressurizing way. You've got to be a lawyer by the time you're 24. And the clue to it, if you're an Aristotelian, is what gives them the most pleasure. It really, really is. So what I try to do with my
pleasure in that hedonistic, sense.
What I tried to do with my kids, when most of my peer group, I have to say, tiger mothers and fathers were forcing them into hundreds of violin lessons, ballet lessons, extra tuition in maths if they weren't good at maths, constantly trying to fashion this person. I just let them do what they wanted, but I exposed them to as many things as I possibly could. Just expose them. And so, for example, my youngest has just gone to university to do Japanese. There's no study of Oriental languages in my family at all. Nothing. There's no history of that. And I thought, where on earth did she get that from? She absolutely loves it. She's already taught us, she's a prodigy at Japanese, okay? She was never particularly good at school at anything else. And she said, but Mummy, don't you remember you took me to see that manga, Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind, when I was 8? I had completely forgotten this. And she said that was the moment when she realised she just loved everything about. And she wants to do cartoons. She wants to be in that. Oh. But the fact that she actually said that really kind of moved me, because I made a point of taking them to lots of different kinds of cinema, not just Disney, right? Mm-hmm. And of course they're sometimes bored and yell their eyes out, in which case I always took them out if they're bored. I'm not going to force them. I did take them around a lot of museums and ancient Greek archaeological sites, but never forced them, ever. And the other one's doing history. She developed a lot of history. I'm probably sounding really smug here, but I think that forcing a child to be, I have one friend I talk about in the book who decided their child was going to be a concert musician when the child was 3. By the time the child was 13, the child, and I'm carefully avoiding gender here, the child pretty much walked out of that house and said they never wants to touch the instrument again. Mm-hmm. What that child was good at, I could see, because they were happy, was cooking and orienteering, right? They needed to be like an army cook. They like camping, compasses, stove fires.
That sounds like you, Spencer.
But if that parent had only just tried to look for the glint of pleasure, then they would have actually sent them off on some extra cooking courses or something, or sent them off to Girl Guides, whatever. I
definitely agree with that. I'm actually a music teacher, and I've had parents they'll say, "Oh, well, if you become his teacher, can you make him practice?" And I'm like, no. And then they're like, well, what do I do? I've spent all this, and I just want to say, I never really said it, but maybe I'll say it now on the podcast, is if your child doesn't enjoy playing, don't make them play. For the people who want to do it, it's a wonderful gift. But for someone who doesn't want to, it's making them hate everything creative, hate music. Hate you a little bit for forcing them to do it,
But one of the wonders, and this is where, I can get a little bit mystical. I'm not an anti-mystical person. One of the wonders about the human race is that we seem to have been given, or to have got, such an incredible, diverse range of abilities. And there is nothing better for me than watching somebody who is really excellent at doing something. And it can be anything from cooking to parenting to driving a car well, right? Any of those things. Seeing somebody who's enjoying being excellent at whatever it is they do. And that is where Aristotle says you are actually getting nearest to God, because this is what animals sort of can't do, right? They are driven by their instincts, and he invented the idea of the hive mind, which is why he thought democracy was the best system, because he said, it's like a public feast. In ancient Greece, they used to have these public feasts where everybody brought the dish they were best at. So your chocolatier would bring the chocolate, the wine thrower would bring the wine. And he says that feast is going to be 5 million times better than if all the dishes were cooked by just one household, right? And of course, they were fabulous, because you got the people making what they love to make, put the most, and bringing it along. And he says that's what the ideal society should be. And I think it's really miraculous how diverse what turns people on. I know I can't say that in America, turn on, can I? Turn on just means excite. Sorry. My children laugh at me. For us, us hippies, it just meant something turns you on means it excites you, right? And I genuinely get unbelievably excited by going to a library and reading some old Greek book. Weird, isn't it? But I do. And I'm very, 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 very lucky that I've had a life where I did that for money. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So getting able to do what you're really, really good at.
Monetizing it is sometimes the problem.
The happiest you can possibly be as a human.
We're getting on towards the end of the hour. Could you let our guests know where they can find your book, and let them know of any other projects that you have going on?
Okay, well, the Aristotles Way is being published in the USA on the 15th of January, 2019. and it'll be, I hope, available in all good bookshops or direct from Penguin USA. If you just go to the Penguin USA website, I tweet quite a lot, mostly about moral, political, and classical things. I mean, it's quite a serious Twitter stream, and my full name is Edith May Hall. I was called after my two grandmothers, so it's at Edith May Hall. And my big project at the moment here in Britain is that I'm actually got government money as an ambassador for teaching about the Greeks and Romans in the states schools. So I'm going and visiting very many, nearly every week I go to 4 or 5 schools, often in deprived areas, and we're introducing not Latin and Greek. These are very, very time consuming, but we're reading Greek myths, we're doing Roman history, a bit of philosophy, a bit of ethics, and it's proving incredibly helpful in, kids don't get that kind of education in the deprived sector. And I've got a big website up for that, which is just aceclassics.org if you want to know what I'm doing with that. My next book, I think I'm going to do one on Plato. I'm not a Platonist in ethics, but what Plato was unbelievably good at, and why Aristotle didn't have to do it again because he'd done it, was fake news. Right? The word is epistemology. It's how do we know what we know? It's that form of philosophy, right? But Plato wrote the definitive books on spin doctors, false rhetoric, lies, fake news, how to mislead people, and what is truth, how to look for real truth. Oh. So it's going to be something like Plato's Way, how distinguishing truth from fiction could change your life. Okay.
Oh, that's really
who was the philosopher
right
who
now.
was the raving lunatic who lived in a barrel?
Diogenes.
Yeah, I'm very
fond of him. It's a cynic. He founded the school of cynicism. He was actually also at Plato's Academy with Aristotle. I mean, they were all the same. But he decided to reject human society altogether. He decided that dogs they were our role models. And you know what? I do love dog virtue. They're very loyal. They're deeply loyal. They couldn't care less what you look like or anything else. If you treat them well, I mean, and he saw that. But he went a bit far for Aristotle, who actually liked civilization. So Diogenes lived in a barrel and lived with dogs and refused even to use a knife and fork. I mean, he was like, because dogs didn't. So he would eat food off the ground. He masturbated and urinated in public.
I remember reading that about him.
He was very, very witty. Right. He did all these barbs. And so he rejected everything to do with civilization. Aristotle actually shares quite a lot of his outlook in that happiness is not based on material possessions. It's on morality. But Aristotle is much more, how would we say, user-friendly in ordinary life.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great talking to you. Thanks so much for coming on. Enjoy your lovely British winter.
Thank you.
Probably a lot milder than ours.
Will you let me know, or my American publisher know?
We will let both of you and the publisher know.
You got my email tonight?
Yeah. We can email you at either the Gmail or the other one, or both.
Well, I'll tweet it out and everything as soon as I've,
we'll definitely send it to you.
I don't have such a big following in the USA yet, which is why I'm very pleased indeed, and thank you very much. But I've had a lot of coverage. It came out in Britain last May.
Okay.
I've quite a lot of Twitter followers who've read it.
A series of articles you wrote for The Guardian are really nice.
And Prospect magazine. There's lots of that. But I've got quite a lot of Twitter followers here, and I would hope it would be nice.
that would be
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, it's also been recorded for Audible books for America.
There's going to be available on Audible.
Are you going to be reading it, or someone?
Oh, it's a wonderful friend of mine. She is a friend, but she's a very famous classical actress here called Sian Thomas. I mean, serious National Theatre. And she sounds like she's, my age. And she also did a little bit of Greek at school, so she knows enough to pronounce it properly. But she's got the most beautiful actressy voice. I mean, she's got the voice I would have if I could choose one. I never had that vocal training. So she's done that, and I'm very pleased because it's my friend and a good, close friend.
Yeah.
Well, it was great to talk to you, and I look forward to it. And good luck.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Conscious Community Podcast. You may contact us via Twitter @TweetCCPodcast or on Facebook at Conscious Community Podcast.